Dobra, proszę się przygotować. Wchodzimy. Pięć, 4, 3, 2, poszło.
Our guest today at the Freedom Games is Dr. Sławomirem Drelichem, political scientist, lecturer at the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Warsaw, in Toruń, teacher, headmaster of the first secondary school in Wrocław. I am Marek Tatawa, and I am deputy president of the Foundation for Democratic Development. And the next 45 minutes would be devoted to a discussion of a new book by Mr. Drelich entitled The Morality of Cannibals, Ayn Rand, Against the Morality of Cannibals. I haven't seen it. I could read it in e-format only, but I believe it's with the author in paper in the Wood Studio. I'm broadcasting from Warsaw. I do believe we'll be able to see the book online and the camera. It was published by a scientific publishing house of the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Toruń. I believe all of you will be able to have it in your hands quite soon. Before I hand over to our guests, I just need to say that was an extremely interesting book for me, as it allows to draw your own conclusions. I expected far more criticism of Ayn Rand's ideas, but I believe this is more of the analysis that allows the reader to draw conclusions alone, and there are no things you would often find in books published by passive fans, loyal believers to Ayn Rand's thought. So I encourage both believers and critics of her works to have a look at the book. And as the author notices, she is quite controversial. She's criticized on the right and on the left wings of stage. And when I was preparing for this conversation, for this meeting, I found a book, a punk song entitled Ayn Rand is Dead, but she is progressing as long as rivers are polluted, but the history will go on and die as she did. It's a kind of anarchic punk criticism of her works. But the title of the book, where we have The Morality of Cannibals, involved in my brain the idea by Grzegorz Braun of 2017, who during one of his conferences, referring to Ayn Rand's ideas, said, "Dangerous Randist cannibals, beware of being eaten." So he noted cannibals not on the left-hand side of the stage, but on the Randist part. Sławomir, welcome. We are very happy to have you with us during the Freedom Games. And the first question, because we may have many people who will have first touch with Ayn Rand's ideas. Who was she? Could you give us a brief introduction and also the idea about the book? Good morning, Marek. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here, for being able to talk about my book. I'm more than happy to say that through these games, we'll be able to say a few words about the book, but mainly about the philosopher and writer. What's the idea? Well, basically, my youth fascinations and readings, because many liberals must have read certain texts or books by Rand, or incidentally came across one of her novels. Similarly, when I was a student, it was the first time I got in touch with her books. And obviously, initially, I devoured her texts with great involvement, emotions. They were extremely fascinating for me. But in the course of time, when I studied the idea, the initial fascination faded away, or at least was calmed, but obviously certain liking to Rand, to her works, remained inside me. And for a number of years, I've been dealing with her ideas, especially her political thought, from the scientific perspective, but also from a journalist's point of view. This book is the essence of a number of years of studies, thought, considerations over her thoughts. Well, for me, what was valuable was the bringing order to that thought. And what is interesting for those who know the books on publications by Ayn Rand is the structure of showing the left-wing vision you included in 5 chapters of your book. But what also attracted my attention was the motif that begins at the beginning of each chapter, some events from 1960s, being students' protests, the Vietnam War, the Berkeley Bar establishment, the manifest of the new left wing, all first successes of Ronald Reagan. Well, this concept, why the 1960s, why this motif of the rebellion of those times, which, as you show, Ayn Rand criticized strongly. Well, 1960s, and in particular 1968, were sort of culmination of social events taking place in the US. That was a point of interest for Rand mainly, but I chose that as the key point to write about Ayn Rand because she, from the very beginning of her work, 1930s, was warning against the left in each area, and from the point of view of the leftists treating the state, the economy, that's her most frequent approach. She warns against the left swings in every area. She claims it's a great threat to the contemporary world, to the civilization, the Western civilization. Rand, well, that's why she says the morality of cannibals. For Rand, the leftists were cannibals who permitted cannibalism in terms of politics and economy. And since 1930s through 40s and 50s, Rand continuously criticized the left. Rand was trying to show that there would come a moment when the left wing will take over universities, politics, governments, will destroy the economy, and that would bring an apocalypse to the order we exist in, or the order the world existed in after World War II. And indeed, for Rand, 1968 was sort of evidence that whatever she had said before was true. Ayn Rand, who was present at various TV shows, claimed, I had warned you for 30 years. I had been saying the left wing will take over the state and destroy it. And 1968, with all its social riots, new political and social movements that emerged, were evidence for art for Rand that she was right. Yes, I was right. I had warned you. It is happening now. Universities are on fire, streets are burning, our order is under destruction. I'm happy that you have mentioned the universities. especially in the context of the first chapter, when you say about the abdication of this common sense, irrationalism that she criticized on the left, the universities. So I have a question about contemporary times. Do modern universities, would Ayn Rand like modern universities, especially the way they look in the US today, would she like them? It seems to me there is even more left ideas, more phenomena that follow, like cancel culture or rejection of any ideas, other philosophies. How would Ayn Rand respond to that? Obviously, you're right. Today, Rand would say, didn't I tell you I warned you against universities being taken over by the left? She seldom spoke of left. She said collectivist. She would say collectivists of different brands have taken over the universities. Universities that should be the center of brain, common sense, striving for truth. By being taken over by collectivists, they are indoctrination tool. They propagate the collectivistic approach and interpretation to the reality. And in fact, Rand would say they are getting away from serving the brain and common sense, and they defend irrationalism. Rand would show that social riots, all the events of 1968 happened upon the permission of universities turning still more left. And indeed, if she could have a look at the condition of the US universities today, she would still complain and she would confirm that the process of departing from the common sense. You mentioned capitalism and economic conclusions that would often appear during discussions about Ayn Rand, but there is a lot of non-economic content. In the first chapter, you will find two statements I'd like you to address and clarify differences. There are mystics of the brain and mystics of the muscle. Where do these terms come from? What do they mean? What's the difference between these two mysticists? Well, indeed, she does use these terms in her works, in her essays, in the works, but using those terms is quite liquid. Sometimes she uses them differently, but when we speak about mysticism of muscles, of brain, of intellect, of the thought, it has different translations into Polish. She wants to say us that the mystical thinking always refers to groups created by two social groups. The mystics of the muscle are those who implement the collectivist ideas practically. Those can be social activists, political activists, people who opt for using force in politics, for instance. In her opinion, different social movements that go to the streets are sort of mystics of the muscle, while the other group, the mystics involved in the intellect, brain, thought, she would refer them to intellectuals, university environment, theologists. So those who in fact build the collectivist way of thinking. Religious thinking was something she found mystical, just like left-wing thinking was for her also something mystical. So mysticism for her is a sort of social imagination or social images that do not necessarily reflect in the real life. For her, certain social groups, great gatherings, were social imaginations, but not truly existing. There was only the individual. So whoever thought of a domination of the social group over an entity of an individual was found by her as a mystic. So mysticism, in her opinion, involves left-wing doctrines like socialism, fascism, communism. Similarly, all viewpoints that involve religions or altruism. Well, in the second chapter on nihilism, you write, but when you write about Rand ideas, you write about moral bankruptcy of then contemporary left wing. How could we see then and now this bankruptcy if we consider her idea to be still real? Well, Rand was attached to sort of objective point of view upon terms morality, ethics. So in her opinion, there are certain moral, normal standards, values that should be considered objective and must not be questioned. In her opinion, all those destructive groups, those who opt for building new order, trying to rearrange social and moral norms, all those environments would attempt an attack on the objectively existing moral standards. That is why Rand believes that left-wing groups, by demanding social change, and that social change would deeply involve a moral shift, then they are the reason for destructing the objective morality, objective rules, objective values, and that is why it's moral bankruptcy in her opinion. It's giving up something we should consider a foundation. She refers mainly to the value of life. In her opinion, life is the essential value, the primary value. Each person should do everything to care for their own life, to strive to keep life. So, as in her opinion, asking a person to share life with someone else, to devote life to others, which somehow is inherent in left-wing or socialist ideologies, also in religions, well, Rand says is consent to neglect your own life. That is the fundamental breach of the basic truth, your life. Somebody who says that other people's life is more important than my own, the person who agrees to sacrifice your own to others' lives, is a moral bankrupt. That's why she used that very strong wording.
The second chapter and many other places in the book see Rand speaking and your interpretation about her attitude towards democracy. In this meeting, not only in this edition, but also in other ones, we try to find dialogue paths. We try to find a compromise, and the word compromise has been rejected by Rand, as it seems. There is a chapter of the book, and the middle way person betrays the objective values. Therefore, the question to you, what is Ayn Rand's attitudes towards democracy? Does she reject democracy, or does it have to look differently? Does it have to contain some kind of fuses, safety gears? I'd put it this way. Rand is democracy's skeptical. She's not an enemy of democracy, but what she demands is democracy based on meritocracy. And on top of that, she would expect democracy to include, to encompass protection of fundamental ethical and moral values. She has indicated to the drawbacks that stem from populism, poor education of citizens, and what follows, their attachment to populist and other collectivist ideologies. So she was quite skeptical, democracy-wise, I would put it this way. And on top of that, she was against any kind of totalitarian, autocratic. She criticized Soviet totalitarianism as well as fascist or Nazi totalitarianism. She was against any kind of dictatorship. She condemned them. When she was speaking about existing dictatorships, because she has noticed some positive results or positive features of these, like being a proponent of capitalism of some cultures, she's always indicated the fact that it violates the basic human values, therefore it cannot be accepted. She would expect democratic system to include specific meritocracy elements and additionally some elements associated with the educational system. Yet we can have doubts here because she was for freedom of education. She was against the state education system. She spoke a lot about upbringing in the spirit of objective values. It keeps returning in her works. And there is another topic that crops out at the freedom games and politicians' discussions. The common good reference, the search for the common good. So the question is as follows. What does Rand think about common good notion? Does common good exist at all? Should we try to strive at that? There's no common good, Rand would say. She would be quite militant at that. It does not exist. It's a myth created by collectivists of all kinds to blur our minds, to have the possession of people. Rand would say it. This is a kind of construct which makes it possible for different people, for different milieus to control social masses. And Rand says that these are religions of all sorts that say that there is a common good that we can create. On the other hand, there are all kinds of ideologies that want to blur human mind, so nothing like common good exists. It is the good of an individual. According to her, or putting it in other words, makes it possible to create the rules of the society where everybody strives to attain their own good, and thus we can reconcile our desires. Despite her pessimistic point of view that is pretty predominant in her works, Rand is still optimistic. She believes we are able to create this kind of society and social order where we strive to attain our own good, yet we can operate conflict-free, more or less. In her opinion, it is possible, and this is what she builds her utopian idea upon. Let's forget about common good. Let's remember there is the good of my person and of other persons, and only then shall we be able to streamline and design the social order. Common good is a popular notion that has been used by politicians. Many people find good associations with this, but there is a number of notions that I scribbled down from your book. These are used commonly by politicians, being words or slogans that bring about positive associations, though Rand is quite negative. Brotherhood, altruism, solidarity, that is on Mr. Morawiecki's lips anytime he speaks, and the movement that is to be created around Rafał Trzaskowski will be referred to as New Solidarity. So would you please tell us what is Round's attitude towards these wonderful notions, altruism, brethrenhood, something that is not in your book, but is very popular in Poland, solidarity? She would speak the same way as she speaks about common good. She would say that these are only propaganda slogans that make it possible to control the masses. Round requires us to tell the truth about the values, about our desires. So she proposes a concept that she calls the egoism virtue. She calls upon us to stop speaking about silly formulas that poison our social life, that poison our political life, like solidarity, altruism, social justice. This is the notion criticized on many occasions by her. She says, we try to attain our own good. We are egoists by nature. So let's put it bluntly, we are egoists. If so, let's create this society. Let's agree to have egoism as a virtue in our perception. May egoism be a virtue. Let's not equal egoism with blind attempt to realize your own goals after other people's dead bodies. If you're egoist, but you follow the virtue, you realize your objectives, yet based on objective values. In consent with morality, you realize the interest without harming other people. If life is the value of utmost importance, I take care about my life, and other people take care of other people's lives. Therefore, I'm obliged to respect other people's lives. If we stick to the paradigm of life, Round says, only then are we be able to be egoist, yet rational, because rational order, rationality, decision-making rationale has been reverberated on numerous occasions, including small-scale decisions and large-scale decisions of the government. Round says, we can be rational egoists. We can cooperate with other people, and these blinding formulas or notions like common good, social justice will no longer be necessary. But she does realize that this is very difficult, that this requires to either engage in a combat against collectivist ideas or to open people's eyes to see the objectivism. This is the notion she calls. One more question. Economic questions that are referred to in Round's philosophy in relation to capitalism. Her publications are associated with the Cold War era, the conflict between the Western world that is based on capitalism and the world of socialism or communism on the other side of the Iron Curtain. Past 1989, that was the end to this dispute. More countries entered this capitalist model of economy. However, the notion that has been seen by Round is the social state boosting, as she has noticed. Not only can it translate to economic results and economic growth, but there is also this ethical measure. The general public becomes lazy, spoiled. So it is Round's attitude to the economy of her times and today's capitalism. What's your opinion? Round arrived in the United States in 1920s, so she observed American economy in pre-Roosevelt realities, before the crisis reality, before the New Deal reality. It was a different world. It was the world of dreams to her liking, starting from the Russian Revolution that harmed her family, speaking about their commodities and their social position. But the family had relatives in the US, so she was thinking how to go to the US. She kind of came to the paradise world. In 1920s, it was the capitalist order, kind of. Starting from the Great Crisis on and Roosevelt's and New Deal's consecutive phases, the American economy was the one that intervened pretty strongly. It was a mixed order, as she called it. It was no longer a capitalism. Little did it have to do with capitalism, in her opinion. She was sorry about it because she believed that the United States was nearing the Soviet model. After the Second World War, she was hoping to return to capitalist values. Not necessarily was it the case. Even Republican administrations allowed themselves to intervene. Worth noting that Round supported Nixon and Nixonian solutions. Not necessarily are these the open market solutions. She observed Democrats implementing Great Society notion. She believed this to be a great tragedy of American nation and economy. In the 60s and the 70s, she didn't see a particular person being able to save or to restore capitalism in the United States. She didn't have clear political affiliations. I'm very curious to find out her assessment about Reagan's 2 terms of office, although he hated and detested Reagan, and she warned against him in the 70s when he had his great speech. Round called for open economy milieus not to be fooled by this man. She criticized state interventions. She would pay great attention to that today. Many crises, she would have indicated, well, those who follow her thoughts do the same. She would have indicated that many crises start with state interventions. State interventions are to blame. I'm curious to find out about her perception of a global economy realities. Little did she write about this. She died in 1982, and global economy realities was in the onset period at that time. Well, the Western world was entering this domain. I'm curious to find out her perceptions. Different free trade contracts on the international scale would go high in her ranking list. She would be a proponent of these. You started wondering about Round's perception of global economy, so the question goes to you. Your interpretation about Round's perception of what has been discussed in the Freedom Games, ecology, environment protection. It has cropped out on numerous occasions in the book. Human as a predominant person that would make the environment subjective. What's your opinion about Round's opinion with reference to climate change issues, or more broadly, environment protection? Yes, Round was ruthless in this matter. It's difficult to say what was the motive for her. She was ruthless, speaking about man being the most important creation on earth. Man, a supreme creation, exceptional creation that should rule the world. Round was quite skeptical towards these milieus or environments that were being created back in the 1970s that called for environment protection. She called them environmentalists. She believed them to be one of the collectives. Collectivism was indicated here. No longer do they think about man as an individual. Man is equal with nature. So man is devoid of this exceptional value of individualism. Therefore, she ran down on them strongly. This is the man to control nature, not vice versa, she believed. She attached great attention to human work effects, technology, industry development. So she was ruthless in this respect. I'm wondering about her perception of what is happening in these streams and milieus today, when we have some scientific proofs that man destroys the environment more than we would have expected few dozens years ago. So she might pose a question: doesn't it harm man's life when man destroys environment? Instead of life-giving environment, this might be a lethal environment. So this answer might be interesting. Some of her opinions, some of her perceptions might have been revised here. So there might have been some kind of revision. Yeah, I think so. Speaking about reason and this kind of attitude towards environment protection, let me return to this collectivism motif. Round has been criticized by the left wing and the right wing, yet she has noticed many similarities between different shades of collectivism, be it the social, communist one, national fascism, and similarities between political collectivisms and spiritual or religious collectivisms. She indicates that political movements are of religious nature. They kind of preach these collectivist ideas. Can you labor the point of collectivism associations in a political and religious sense? First and foremost, in order to recognize a collectivism, we would have to look into the idea and idea's attitude towards man or an individual. If man is in the center together with their freedoms and the right to decide about themselves, to define their own interest, if this stream protects man, human, individuals, and only then does it think about some kind of collective aspect, she would say it would be individualism broadly defined. If in the stream we mainly speak about different forms of collectivism, doesn't matter whether we speak about Christians, society, representatives of a particular race. According to her, this is the collectivism line of thinking. Collectivism assumes the primacy of society, unity, collective body primacy over the interest of an individual. In her opinion, all kinds of religions have this collectivism predominant. Collectivism is the assumption of all religions. First and foremost, they speak about a collection or collectivism. Many ideologies stress collectivism, stressing different types, be it fascism or Nazi. Society, common good, social interest. And here are the common elements that she warns against. Probably she didn't associate herself with a doctrine or ideology. Many of us, political researchers, attach a great importance to libertarianism. This is how I call her, although I know this is a simplification of my analysis. Although she never called herself this way, she squabbled with the ministry, with Hayek, though she didn't have any good relations with the latter. Never did she call herself this way. But if we analyze her thoughts, this would be the closest, more than anarchy capitalism. In many ideologies, she found this collectivism or deviation from rational. Have you ever wondered who's closer to Round? Looking at newspaper and news station headlines, who would she vote for in the US elections? Biden, Trump, Liberal Party? Or she wouldn't vote at all, saying, I don't want to be a part of the system. She would feel sorry. She would despair and criticize everybody, no doubts. In my opinion, she would vote Libertarian Party, the closest to her ideas. A female candidate had the program closest to Round's ideas. Policy-wise, worldview-wise, if she had to choose between the two main candidates, she was quite realistic. She followed the political reason. Thus, she supported Nixon. Still, she would be closer to Trump rather than Biden, closer to support for economy. Or she would pose a question, who would be more harmful for capitalism? And she would decide that Democratic Party would be more harmful than Trump. And she would closer to Trump. Yes, you are right saying that few references to global capitalism. She didn't live long enough to see this explosion of global capitalism. Biden would be less harmful in this respect, speaking about trade cooperation with European Union and other countries or blocks of countries in the world. One more thing about the US, and I think it will be the punchline to our discussion. Black Lives Matter's recent protests are associated with the 1960s riots, yet still associated with some kind of collective values, the skin tone of some of the people. She criticized racism being an example of collectivism. So what would be her attitude towards this kind of social riot? She would support these milieux as those fighting for true equality, legally wise, because that was the equality she was speaking about. Equal rights for all people, regardless the race. And I believe that she would have seen this collectivist element. She would agree with some American columnists saying that some of those protecting Afro-Americans have this new racism attitude, believing this to be truly important, a very important, vital element of identity. She would criticize it, saying that we would have to fight for equal rights of different races, yet the race should not be treated as human identities element because it does not demonstrate what kind of man we are. We were speaking about Cannibal's morality book, juxtaposed with the leftist vision of society, with the book author, Sławomirem Drelichem. Thank you very much. This book is a good read, so you should be interested in Ryan's ideas. You can see the book in the screen. I can show you the mug made with Capitalism Center. There's Ayn Rand on it, and objectivism.pl is the website. You should look into and other organizations that are into Round in Poland. Thank you very much for your attention, and you are more than welcome to read the book. Yes, read the book, please.